Namaste. I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell here at the Unity Center in beautiful San Diego. Thank you so much for subscribing to this channel. Please make sure that you like the video you've just watched and consider making a contribution on our app or on our website. It's really easy to do, and thank you in advance for that support. It does make a difference. If you take a look, or if you notice the title of my talk, you might be able to piece together where I'm going with it. So the title of my talk is Verizon Was Onto Something. Verizon was onto something. So I told you we're going to be looking at the topic of happiness and the habits that have been scientifically linked to the experience of happiness. The song that Natalie just sang, Cry If You Want To, and the song she'll sing after the message, which is at the opposite end of the spectrum. It's all about I Believe in You. And the title, Verizon Was Onto Something, all have to do with what's found to be one of the most significant of the 4 habits that scientifically link to happiness. Verizon was onto something: family and friends. Family and friends, relationships, and the scientific link of relationship, certain kinds of relationships, to an individual's well-being. So it's not like I've not talked about happiness before, but I came across a TED Talk that just really inspired me to pick the topic back up and share it from this point of view. It was a TED Talk done by Dr. Sanjeev Chopra. He's a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. So put it in that context, the habits that he's outlining that build the experience of happiness in us, coming from a scientific perspective, coming from a professor of medicine at Harvard. In his TED Talk, he goes to great lengths to debunk the myth that happiness comes from having stuff and having lots of money. That's what a lot of people think. In his TED Talk, he said this: winning a $20 million lottery ticket won't make you happier. Research has shown that after 1 year, lottery winners go back to their baseline. Some are even less happy. A few probably spent their money on a big mansion or a fancy car. Maybe they spent it all on gambling. But even so, at the end of 3 months, that's a short period of time. Even so, at the end of 3 months, it's just a house, it's just a nice car. And these last words got to me when I read them and heard them. You get used to it. Let that sink in for a moment. You get used to it. Here are some wise words from Unity's co-founder, Charles Fillmore. He said, this is a book he wrote on prosperity during the Depression. You may think that you could live better and do more good if you had lots and lots of money. Things would not be a bit better with you if you had $1 million unless you also had the understanding to use it for the good of yourself and others. Would you give a child $1 million to go buy candy and ice cream for himself? We must evolve with our possessions until we get the ability to handle them. We must evolve with our possessions until we get to the ability to handle them. Back to Dr. Chopra's words. After you get it, after 3 months, most people go back to their same state because you get used to it. You get used to it. He calls this phenomenon of getting used to it the hedonic, I think I'm saying it right, or hedonic adaptation. It's a concept that people's general level of happiness is something they're always going to return to, unless they cultivate certain habits of mind and living. And so the very first habit, the very first scientifically connected habit that helps a person to raise that baseline of happiness is the quality of our relationships. The quality of our relationships. Developing a close bond with people we trust and confide in is essential to our overall well-being. Developing the kinds of relationships with people that we trust and can confide in. Think about the song that Natalie sang, Cry If You Want To. You may have felt a twinge of discomfort hearing the song. You may be dealing inside of yourself with your own thoughts about, well, you know, I'm in a teaching that emphasizes positive thinking to a certain extent and looking for the good and cultivating that. And that's true, that's at the core of our teaching, but it's not the only thing at our teaching. At our teaching is also being real, being authentic, being vulnerable. And so developing the kinds of bonds with people where we can really trust, where we can really be our authentic selves, those are the kinds of relationships. It takes courage and time to develop them. But those are the kinds of relationships that point to the benefits, or not point to, that help to cultivate the benefits of well-being and happiness. The former U.S. Surgeon General said this, and this is from a piece of writing in 2017, and I give you the date because this is before the pandemic. So the Surgeon General at that time was Vivek Murthy, and he said, the world is suffering from an epidemic of loneliness. 2017, the world is suffering from an epidemic of loneliness. If we cannot rebuild strong, authentic social connections, we will continue to splinter apart in the workplace and in society. I'm struck by the fact that that was said in 2017, before we all experienced the global shutdown, really, and the global isolation that the pandemic put us all through. If we cannot rebuild strong, authentic social connections, we will continue to splinter apart in the workplace and in society. Researchers have warned that loneliness and depression, or loneliness and social isolation, can be as damaging to one's health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. I know. That's mind-boggling, right? Loneliness and isolation. I think we've gotten into the habit of isolating. And I think we've gotten into the habit of isolating that there are two strong contributing factors to that. One that was circumstantial, that we really had no choice over, right? When the pandemic was raging, we had to isolate, right? But we've gotten used to it, and we're still doing it to a certain extent. It's one of the reasons that you hear me talking about the importance of community, of calling the Sangha back home. Yes, George is going like this. Yes, there's something that cannot be sufficiently recaptured on the other side of the screen. Now, the other side of the screen is the only way you can participate, then stay there and do that. But we need to come together for our physical, emotional well-being. I said there were two factors. One, the pandemic that forced us circumstantially into isolation and then getting used to it and having it become a habit. I think the other, maybe more unique to our country right now, is just how polarized we have become. And so we isolate maybe out of fear of, I just don't want to talk to that person anymore. I mean, think about Thanksgiving, right? Some of us might already be thinking, now, what was it I learned in living room conversations about how to have a happy Thanksgiving meal with Uncle Harry or Aunt Samantha that's diametrically opposed to my way of thinking or living, right? And so we isolate. We can isolate physically. We can also isolate mentally and emotionally. Human beings are social beings. The science supports that happiness increases when we have and develop healthy connections with each other. I'm going to read two pieces to you that were written by two of our members, maybe a month ago. I was having a conversation in the cafe with some of our members, and we were talking about how it feels to try to be coming back together and be with one another, and where and why and how that's important. And I said to them, I wish I could have videotaped this conversation to share it with everyone. And so I'm going to read just two of the pieces right now. The first is from David and Yvette Stanley. And I'm reading it, and I am not editing it. Online sucks. It's also very difficult to reach out to newcomers online. The energy we give and receive is so much greater when we are in person. Attending online was a blessing when there was no other choice. It had a place and a time. I believe we were meant to strengthen our spiritual paths together, face to face. Jesus sent his disciples out in twos. One of the main reasons the Buddha created a Sangha was to enable those who had completed the path to help those who were not yet enlightened. We must all ask ourselves, what is the best path forward on our spiritual journey? Am I giving up what's better for what's more convenient? Now, don't hear me say that if the only way you can connect in this community is online because you live out of state. I'm not saying don't connect online, but I am saying there's a part of our spiritual growth and path that I think requires us to be together in person. I was struck, David, by your reminding us of the teaching of the Buddha, that the Sangha was to enable those who had completed the path to help those who were not yet enlightened. I think there's a piece of that for us. When we come together in community, whether it's here in our church family or when you come together with members of your family maybe that you're at odds with, those of us who maybe are a little more spiritually mature, a little more spiritually involved, can help pull others along into a higher level of consciousness. Does this make sense? And so it's not just about we come for what we can get. We come for the difference that we can make. Can you feel that? You're very quiet. Okay. Family and friends. Relationships where we can confide in, where we can be real, where we can cry if that's what we're feeling, where we can say, I am really afraid. I am going through something in my life right now that just scares me to death. Will you pray with me? Will you be with me? Will you walk with me, symbolically walk with me? If we can't do that, we're going to find ourselves at the receiving end of ill health, dissatisfaction, a life that feels empty. The Mayo Clinic offered a long list of benefits for the kinds of relationships that I'm talking about, the Sangha that the Buddha talked about, the idea of coming together that Jesus talked about when he sent his disciples out by two. There are physical well-beings, there are emotional well-beings. This is according to the Mayo Clinic. Adults with strong social connections have a reduced risk of depression, high blood pressure, unhealthy body mass. That's an interesting one, isn't it? And studies have found that older adults who have meaningful relationships and social support are likely to live much longer than their peers. Emotional well-being. When we have close relationships, when we're in community, our sense of happiness is stronger. Our sense of self-image is stronger. Our sense of purpose is stronger. The second piece that was shared with me, and it was only two of several that came from that Sangha conversation, was from George Graham. He wrote, "Finally, after waiting for over 2 years, I've returned to Unity to experience all that is calming and inspiring. Equally satisfying is once again seeing the faces of people who've also returned, who've also returned, so that we may share the strength and spirituality of togetherness. And when in need, I know the people and prayer partners are there for me to turn to. The Unity Center is truly a place to," and he's quoting from the book of Romans, Paul, to quote, "rejoice with them that rejoice and weep with them that weep, to be of the same mind one toward another, to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep, to cry if you need to cry, to celebrate when you need to celebrate." Verizon was onto something. And I'm not a fan of Verizon. I have Verizon, probably many of it, but they were onto something, the whole concept of linking family and friends. Anything is possible. I really believe this. Anything is possible when you have the right people in your orbit supporting you. Spiritual community is dedicated to that. Is your workplace dedicated to that? Some of your workplaces might be, but probably not all of them. Is your community or your neighborhood dedicated to that? Probably not with the same consistency and the same focus and the same intention. Anything is possible when the right people are in your orbit that believe in you. I can't remember what the issue was, but I do remember feeling so discouraged and so uncertain of something that big that I needed to do. And I turned to a mentor of mine at the time. He's no longer on the planet. He was another Unity minister by the name of Reverend Jack Boland. And I remember saying to him how challenged I was feeling and how uncertain I was feeling about this big thing I was trying to do. And he looked at me and he said, "Do you believe that you can do this?" And I said, "I don't think so." And he said then, "Do you believe that I believe you can do this?" And I said, "Well, yes, you're Jack Boland, of course." And then he said to me, "Then ride on my belief until yours is strong enough." Isn't that powerful? I think in a way, that's a piece of the Buddha and the idea of the Sangha, that you may be here sitting knowing all of this already. Maybe you should be the one up here. But we don't leave our community because we finally feel like we got it all together. I don't need to hear anymore. We stay then to support and help the other. And by the way, it is my belief we're never completely done anyway. And if we think we are, that's a whole other problem. That's a whole other lesson. And I won't get into that one right now. But anything is possible when you have the right people there to support you. As I was putting my notebook together, I had a note from my daughter in my notebook. Jennifer Purcell is on staff here, and she often helps pull some of the preliminary readings for me and helps to pull some of the preliminary songs that we might share with our guest artist. And she inserted a note in my notes and said, "Mom, do you remember how many times when I was struggling in all of my years as a student at UC Berkeley, the #1 public university in the country, it's a hard school to get into, Do you remember how many times I didn't think I'd make it? And you kept saying, I believe in you. Mom, I relied on that. And together we made it through 4 years. She has a learning disability. That learning disability wasn't even diagnosed until her 2nd or 3rd year at Cal. She's not a neurotypical person, meaning that her brain is not wired in the normal neurotypical way. And so everything, when your brain is not wired in a normal neurotypical way, becomes much more difficult to navigate. But to be on the receiving end, to know, to be able to play in her life the role that Jack Boland played in mine, to say, but I believe in you, is quite a gift. And I think each one of us sitting in this room, each one of us tuning in online, we can be that for someone else. We can make that kind of difference for someone else. I believe in you. One of our core teachings in Unity is that the divinity, the God self, resides in every single one of us, whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we grew up in a faith or a religion that told us we had it or not, that the same divine essence, the same God presence that indwelled Jesus or the Buddha or any enlightened being indwells us. When we say, I believe in you, we are piercing the veil of another's disguise, their human disguise. We're piercing that veil and saying, I know the truth about what's really in you. You are of God, you are of Source, you are of the divine as well. And because I know you are, no matter what you look like right now, no matter what disability or challenge or circumstantial challenge you're going through, there's something in you that's greater than that. Can you see the link between that kind of energy and a person's happiness? Does that have anything at all to do with money? Nothing at all to do with it. Nothing at all to do with it. I found this quote from Les Dawson. The right people might be family or not. The right people might be friends or not. But find the right people. Then he goes on to say, families are like fudge, mostly sweet with a few nuts. Yeah, I laughed at that too. Yep, we all have that in our family, right? You can think of the ones that are mostly sweet and nuts. But the humbling thing to me is whenever my mind goes to chuckling at that, mostly nuts, I wonder who in my family, are you with me, is thinking, I'm the nut, right? It's a humbling thing to hold, right? Verizon being onto something, family and friends, the scientific research, the scientific link between being happy and having the kinds of relationships that I'm talking about, both on the giving end and the receiving end of them, is important and is powerful. I truly believe that if it were not for those kinds of relationships, if it were not for the idea of Sangha, that Christianity would not exist today. And I say that because the early church didn't look anything like church today. It didn't look like what we do in this country, typically at 9 or 11 o'clock. The early church met initially in secrecy. The early church met in people's homes. The early church were clusters of people in a Sangha kind of energy, trying to understand something about this teacher called Jesus and some of the things that he said in an effort to live their life better. And were it not for that kind of Sangha energy, that sense of community, I don't think church as we know it today would have existed at all. If that's not evidence of the importance of relationship, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. And so where does this all lead us? I think it leads us to really paying attention to what are the kinds of relationships we have at the center of our life. We have all different kinds of relationships, right? We have relationships out of necessity. We have relationships maybe with people that are more of an acquaintance relationship or more transactional, not abusive, but more transactional. We have relationships maybe out of habit. Some perhaps we feel out of obligation. But those are not the kinds of relationships that I think the science is showing leads to happiness or helps to cultivate happiness. It's a kind of relationships that are built on what's really important in life. Deep, deep values. Those are the kinds of relationships where we can really be who we are, where we can cry when we need to cry, and the other will sit there and hold that space for us, not pull us down, but be there in an empathetic way with us. The kinds of relationships where we can express when we're feeling afraid or we're feeling ashamed because we did something that we really, really regret. And the other can hold that safe place for us so we can move beyond that. And the kinds of relationships where we can share our greatest joy and our greatest accomplishment and have the other not be jealous or not shift the energy away, but can be there and be our own best cheerleader. I want that for you. I hope you have that. And if you don't have that, I have a suggestion on where you can look for it. In a place like this, really, really. I wonder sometimes, and I'll start to to close up here. I wonder sometimes about when I stand in the lobby to say goodbye to you. And I know it can be awkward, and I'm not saying you have to come through the line or anything like that, but I see how quickly people leave. And I know that we probably are very busy, but I also wonder if we're leaving behind the opportunity for friendship and connection that could really make a difference. If you got something to do, we go do it. But I notice and I think, wow, of all the places that could be so safe and so nurturing and so uplifting, why do we disperse so quickly? I don't have an answer to it, and I'm not asking you to write me notes and tell me answers, but take it in and just think about it. If you have the kinds of relationships that I'm talking about, nurture them with all your mind and heart and soul. Don't take them for granted. Don't take them for granted. Make sure you stay in touch. Make sure if you're at a place in your life where things are humming along and really good, look around you and who can you pull back up alongside you? Who of your friends might need you? Who do you know that you care about that you might need to say to, cry with me if you need to, or I'm here for you, I believe in you. Namaste.